من ذا يفرج كربا بات يضنينا ويزرع الورد فينا والرياحينا وينشر الهدي إيمانا وموعظة فبالجهالة قد خابت مساعينا من ذا يفرج كربا.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome to another edition of Friday Night Live on ITV. Yes, the first Friday after Eid al-Adha. Last week there was a lot of activity on the airwaves of ITV. We had the Hajj broadcast, and especially on the day of Mina and the day of Arafah, continuous back-to-back live programming on Hajj. May Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala accept, and may Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala grant us the ability to understand the lessons behind the phenomenal journey of Hajj and the ultimate sacrifice that Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam made, and to be able to imbibe, implement and inculcate those lessons into our lives as well, inshallah. Last week Friday was a great day. It was the day of Eid al-Adha. It was the day of Jumu'ah. It was a Jumu'ah that fell within the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah and hence had added virtue. So yes, a great day, and all of that has passed, but there is still virtue, because this is still the month of Dhul Hijjah. It is still the Ashur-e-Hurum. Although the Islamic year is drawing to an end, we hardly have 2 weeks left now, and the Gregorian year is also drawing to a close. Another year that passes is another year that has lapsed in our lives, another year that has lapsed from the number of years that has been allocated for our lifespan. So Dhul Hijjah and the month that will follow, Muharram, the first month of the Islamic calendar, are both from the Ashur-e-Hurum, both from the sacred months. And remember, previously we have already discussed that in the Ashur-e-Hurum, any good that we do, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is prepared to multiply the reward. But any sin that is perpetrated during these sacred months, then it is also multiplied, and the severity of it is also much greater. We're back now to our normal programming, Friday nights, 8:30 to 9:30. Normal format. As I said, for the last week or two, we've been focusing on Hajj al-Qurbani. But from this week again, we go back to the old format. We'll commence first with the Tafseer of the Quran Kareem. And this week, we'll be taking a look at verses from Surah Ma'idah, that tell us about the instruction that Musa alayhi salatu wasalam relayed to the Banu Israel with regards them recapturing their ancestral land, the Holy Land, and their response to that. We'll also then move on to the current affairs segment for this week. Then our story for the week. We talk about those who are given very special favors by Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, and then they become amongst the most ungrateful servants of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. We will also continue with our nikah segment, marriage tip for the week, and conclude as always with a sunnah for the week, still on the topic and the theme of the sunnahs of eating. May Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala make the program beneficial, educational, inspirational and motivational, inshallah. I look forward to being in your company for the next hour or so. Keep viewing ITV.
من ذا يفرج كربا بات يضنينا من ذا يفرج كربا بات يضنينا.
Welcome back to Friday Night Live. We commence now with the Tafseer segment. The last time we had a Tafseer discussion, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, we discussed the second last ruku of the 13th juz of the Quran Kareem, a ruku from Surah Ibrahim, where Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala talks about Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam's dua when he came to Makkah al-Mukarramah, understanding that he would have to leave his wife and his son in barren land, how he first made dua for their spiritual well-being, for the safety of the iman, then he made dua for their material well-being, and how we still see the fruits and the effects of the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, and how in the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, various qualities of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam are manifested. His humility, his giving priority to spiritual needs, to spiritual requirements, etc. So we had a lengthy discussion regarding that, alhamdulillah. And once again we ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to grant us the ability to implement the lessons that we derive from these discussions. Now today I would like to focus your attention on a few verses from Surah Ma'idah. Verses 21 onwards, it's an entire ruku in the second quarter of the sixth juz of the Quran Kareem, where Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala talks about a particular episode. And before I go into the verses themselves, I just want to give you the background to the episode. Then further details to this incident and episode will come to the fore as we discuss the verses. We know the Banu Israel, the Israelites, were under the rule of Pharaoh. And he was very tyrannical to them, very dictatorial. He subjected them to slavery of very epic proportions. And Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala sent Musa alayhi salatu wasalam to preach to them and to preach to the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh refused to listen. And ultimately Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala destroyed Pharaoh by drowning him in the sea. And the Banu Israel then took over all the Pharaoh's land and all his dominion and all his wealth and possessions. And not only were they then liberated from his slavery, but they became rulers in their own right. Now after this had transpired, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala instructed Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, the Prophet Moses, to instruct the Banu Israel, the Israelites, to go and reclaim their ancestral land. The Banu Israel had been residing in the area of what is known today as Palestine, or the greater Sham area, and I will explain that as we go along. And then they ended up in Egypt, and they were under the tyranny of Fir'aun, the Pharaoh. Now, the Amalekite tribe was residing in their ancestral land, and Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala had instructed them to go and reclaim it and also promised them victory. However, when they went there, and when they saw the might of the Amalekite tribe, their physical stature, their power, etc., they became cowardly, and they backed down. And they refused to implement the instruction of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, except two individuals. However, the majority didn't want to, so Musa alayhi salatu wasalam could not proceed. And then Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala put a punishment upon them. For 40 years, they were wandering in the wilderness. In the morning, they would depart from a particular point, and in the evening, they would end up returning at exactly that point. So no matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't progress. And 40 years passed like that, and that entire generation passed away. And in that period, even Musa alayhi salam and Harun alayhi salam passed away. And from the two men that remained loyal to Musa alayhi salam, the one was Yusha bin Nun, who became a prophet and a Nabi after Musa alayhi salatu wasalam passed away. And then it was under his leadership that the Banu Israel reclaimed their ancestral land. So that in a nutshell is the story. Now in the first verse, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala mentions, this is verse 21, وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ, when Musa said to his people, when Moses said to his people, يَا قَوْمِ اذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ, O my people, do not forget, remember the bounties of Allah upon you. إِذَا جَعَلَ فِيكُمْ أَنْبِيَاء, when He sent many messengers to you, prophets to you. وَجَعَلَكُمْ مُلُوكًا, and He made you kings. وَآتَاكُمْ مَا لَمْ يُؤْتِ أَحَدًا مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ, and He granted you what He had not granted many from the entire universe. Now here, Musa alayhi salatu wasalam was employing a tactic, and the ulama say this is worthy of emphasis. He was employing a very important tactic, and we need to learn a great lesson from this when it comes to delivering an instruction or issuing an instruction. Rather than go straight out and just issue the instruction, rather soften that person's heart, make that person more receptive, more willing to receive the instruction. So what strategy did Musa alayhi salatu wasalam employ? Musa alayhi salatu wasalam first reminded the Banu Israel with regards to the favors of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala upon them, that, O Banu Israel, remember, Allah is that being that granted you many prophets. No other nation has received as many prophets as the Banu Israel, the Israelites have received. In the last era of the Banu Israel, the Israelites, that's between the Prophet Moses, Musa alayhi salam, and the Prophet Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, 1,000 prophets alone in that era were sent to the Banu Israel. Some ulama, some scholars are of the opinion that from the progeny of Ishaq alayhi salam, Isaac, who is the one son of Ibrahim alayhi salam, from his progeny alone, and he is obviously a forefather in the ancestry of the Banu Israel, of the Israelites, 24,000 prophets, 24,000 Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam were sent. So he first made mention of Allah's spiritual bounty upon them. Again, preference and emphasis on spirituality. That listen, in terms of the spiritual side of it, Allah has blessed you with so many prophets that no other nation has been blessed. وَجَعَلَكُمْ مُلُوكًا. And Allah has granted you kingship. Allah has granted you power. You were slaves. Pharaoh was slaughtering your sons. Pharaoh had subjugated you to the worst levels of slavery. And Allah had liberated you from all of that. This not only destroyed the Pharaoh, but whatever was his possessions have now become your possessions. You have become leaders in your own right. So now giving them the material side of it, the material bounties which Allah had conferred upon them. Then concluding it by combining both the spiritual and the physical bounties and reminding them overall, وَآتَاكُمْ مَا لَمْ يُؤْتِ أَحَدًا مِّنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. Allah has favored you so much, both from a spiritual perspective and from a material perspective, that you cannot be compared to anyone else in terms of the amount of bounties that you have received from Allah. So, this is a strategy. You remind them now that the person who is issuing the instruction is the person who has done so much for you. And this is something that we also need to learn. That before issuing an instruction, remind the person, adopt this strategy, make the person more receptive, soften that person's heart. It didn't work in the case of the Banu Israel, but that was not the fault of Musa alayhi salam. He employed the correct strategy. The problem was with their stubbornness. Nonetheless, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala mentions that this is what transpired. Musa alayhi salam first told them about the spiritual bounties of Allah upon them, the material bounties, and then he reminded them that overall they were a very, very privileged and a very, very lucky nation when it came to the favors of God Almighty, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Now, in the next verse, Musa alayhi salatu wasalam talks about the instruction. As a messenger, he relays now, he conveys the instruction of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Ya qawmi dkhulul ard al-muqaddasah. That, O my people, enter the sacred land. Enter the sanctified land. Now, what is the sacred land? What is the sanctified land? There is a variety of opinions, different opinions. I'll take you through some of the different opinions. Some ulama say it's in reference to Al-Quds. Al-Quds is Jerusalem. Baytul Maqdis, Al-Quds, two different names for Jerusalem. Al-Aqsa is actually that piece of land in Al-Quds, that Haram Sharif area within those four walls. But I'll explain that in greater detail shortly. So some say the sacred land is the city of Jerusalem, Al-Quds, or Baytul Maqdis, Baytul Muqaddas, whichever way you want to pronounce it. Others say no, Ariha, one of a very old town close by, that was referred to as the Holy Land. Some say Jordan, others say Damascus, others say Damascus, Jordan, and Jerusalem. There's a variety of opinions, but the most common and perhaps the most correct opinion is that Al-Ardul Muqaddasa, the blessed land, is in reference to the whole area of Sham. Now Sham, we would translate in English as Syria, but it's not in reference to today's Syria. It's in reference to today's Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Palestine. This whole area formed what was known as Sham in those days. So Al-Ardul Muqaddasa is actually that entire area of Sham. Now Ismail Adam Patel, the well-known chairperson of the Friends of Al-Aqsa Foundation in the UK, he has written a book, Fada'ilul Quds, the virtues of Jerusalem. And in there, he explains this very, very, very beautifully. He says, that entire area of Sham is blessed, meaning Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Palestine. It is the land of the Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam. It is the land where many Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam had come. And it's the land where many Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam have been buried. Actually, great scholars have written that after visiting the Haramain, after visiting Makkah al-Mukarramah and Madinah al-Munawwara, the best place to visit is this area of Sham. Alhamdulillah, I've been fortunate to travel to those lands, and I would encourage whoever has the opportunity to travel and visit the graves of the Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam. And as South Africans, it's much easier for us compared to many Muslims in other parts of the world to visit Palestine. Don't be deterred by some stories about how long you have to wait at the border, etc. That's part of the routine, but it's well worth it to go and visit Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa Al-Mubarak. So coming back to the point, Ismail Patel explains, and he says that the whole area of Sham, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Palestine, that is blessed. Then in that whole area, Al-Quds, Jerusalem, is more blessed. And in Jerusalem, the Haram Sharif area, Al-Aqsa, that is the most blessed. So the whole Sham is blessed. Within Sham, Al-Quds, Jerusalem, is more blessed. And within Jerusalem, the Haram Sharif, that square-shaped piece of land which is within those four walls in the old city of Jerusalem. And in there you would find the Black Dome Masjid, the Gold Dome Masjid, the Marwani Musalla, the Burak Musalla, all are in that Haram Sharif area. That's the Haram area now. Like in Makkah, you've got the Haram, then you've got the city of Makkah. So in Jerusalem, you've got the city of Jerusalem, Al-Quds, or Baytul Muqaddas, and within there you've got the Haram Sharif, which is known as Aqsa. Aqsa is not any one masjid within that Haram Sharif area, it's the entire Haram Sharif area. So Sham is blessed, within Sham, Al-Quds, Jerusalem is more blessed, and within Al-Quds and Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa is the most blessed. So that's the meaning of Al-Ardul Muqaddasa. So Musa alayhi salatu wasalam said to his people, Ya qawmi dukhulul ardal muqaddasa, that, oh my people, enter the blessed land. This is the instruction of Allah. Allati katabaha Allahu lakum. It's that land which Allah has decreed for you. Meaning that this was actually a subtle glad tiding. You see, it's also another strategy. When you instruct people to do something, tell them what the benefit is. Make them feel positive about it. Encourage them. So Musa alayhi salam was encouraging them that go into this land, go and recapture your ancestral land, and Allah has decreed it for you. So, in other words, you will be victorious. But then he also sounded out a warning to them. وَلَا تَرْتَدُّوا عَلَىٰ أَدْبَارِكُمْ فَتَنْقَلِبُوا خَاسِرِينَ. Don't turn back on your heels. Don't turn your back to the command of Allah, because then you'll be from the losers. So this is a true leader. First, he prepares the person to receive the instruction. Then he relays the instruction, or he issues the instruction. And after relaying the instruction or issuing the instruction, he then gives them the positive, that if you fulfill this, this is what the benefit will be. But he also warns them, if you don't, this is what the consequence will be. So for today's discussion, I've given you the background to the story, and we've discussed the first two verses. There are a few more verses in this ruku, and we'll continue the discussion next week, inshallah, and the story will unfold as we go through the tafsir of the upcoming verses. May Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala grant us the tawfiq of understanding Quran and implementing the teachings of the Quran. Ameen Ya Rabbal Alameen.
من ذا يفرج كربا بات يضنينا من ذا يفرج كربا بات يضنينا.
Welcome back to Friday Night Live. We now move on to our current affairs segment for the week. And on the international front, globally, actually, the story that dominated headlines in the last week has been Hurricane Sandy. After that, it was dubbed Superstorm Sandy. If you get a chance, you should go on the internet and look up the difference between a hurricane and a tornado and a tropical storm. And it's quite interesting to learn about these things. Nonetheless, I mean, the specifics of it, many of you would be aware. Millions of people without electricity. New Jersey and New York, the most battered, they took the brunt of it. It's the worst storm to have hit America in over a century. The first time since 1888 that the stock exchange closed for a full 2 days. The first time in many years that even the federal government in many ways were on alert. The first time that the stock exchange closed since 9/11. So there are many statistics. However, there are a few things in terms of pertinent discussions and thereafter lessons that I want to touch on. The first, it was very unfortunate to note some Muslims that were tweeting and making comments that the Americans deserve what they are getting. This is a punishment from Allah for the atrocities that they have perpetrated in other parts of the world. And I think here as Muslims we need to be very, very careful. We can't allow our emotions to get the better of us. Remember, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has always emphasized justice, even against those who were directly guilty of perpetrating very severe crimes against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala told Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, Allah's darling, the greatest of Allah's creation, وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ عَلَىٰ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا. Because you have some issues with a particular nation, don't let that allow you to transgress. Even though you are Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, don't allow that to make you transgress. Then even when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I mean, imagine the plight, imagine the emotions and the sentiments of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he saw the mutilated body of his beloved uncle Hamza. Imagine what went through the heart of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at that particular moment. And then the Nabi of Allah, in a state of emotion, made the remark that I'm going to take retribution for what they have done to my uncle by killing 70 of the Quraysh. Immediately Allah revealed the verse, وَإِنْ عَاقَبْتُمْ فَعَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُوقِبْتُمْ بِهِ. Listen, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though you are the messenger of Allah, you are the greatest of all messengers, you are the greatest of humankind, you are the greatest of Allah's creation, then too justice has to prevail. You can't take retribution from 70 because of what happened to your uncle who was 1. And immediately Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam then retracted that particular statement. So the point I want to make, emotions aside, the laws of Allah has to prevail, and the laws of Allah, the laws of justice tell us we cannot hold the collective responsible for the actions of a few. That is not permissible from a Shari point of view. That is contrary to the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All the American people are not responsible for the actions of the American government or the American army or certain groups within the United States of America. Yes, we can understand and we can appreciate the sentiment of people because of what has happened in Iraq, because of the lies spoken, because of what's happening in Afghanistan, because of foreign policy, because of the constant defending of the apartheid state of Israel. We know all of that, but that's not, we cannot hold the whole country guilty. Like apartheid was a heinous crime, but not all South Africans living in South Africa at that time were guilty. And not all South Africans living in South Africa at that time could be held responsible. So similarly, it's not fair for us to hold all Americans responsible if we are not happy with the foreign policy or the foreign affairs policy of the government, etc. Then also remember, there are many Muslims that reside within America. So rather than making such reckless remarks and unjustified remarks that they're getting what they deserve and that this is the punishment and the wrath of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala upon them, we as Muslims, we ought to be showing sympathy. We ought to be feeling for them. Even those who are not Muslims from amongst the victims. Because I have discussed this hadith previously. Al-Khalqu Iyalullah. The entire creation is the family of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has love for every one of His creation. And we need to feel and we need to sympathize and we need to make dua for all of the victims, that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala make it easy for them. Then also, that's the one point. So those statements were reckless and they have no basis in Sharia. Secondly, we also need to understand we cannot classify these natural disasters that take place or these events of nature as a punishment, en masse or carte blanche, so to speak. I remember many years ago when the tsunami took place, then some of the senior ulama were mentioning that one event can have multiple, can come for multiple reasons to different people. One event can be a punishment for some, it can be a test for others, it can be a means of elevation of stages for others as well. For some people it's a test to see how it will respond. For some who are pious, by putting them through difficulty, their stages are further elevated by Allah. So one event can have multiple purposes, and those purposes are known only to Allah. For who it is a punishment, for who it is a test, for who it's a means of elevation, that is only known to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. So we have no right to now proclaim that this is the punishment of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, and this is something which people deserve, etc. Having said that, events of this nature, however, do give us some lessons. We will not say that this is a punishment. We will not say that these people deserve what they are getting because we have some issues with the American government or with the American army and their foreign policy and their track record, etc. These are innocent people by and large. However, we must take lesson from it, whether it happens in America, whether it happens in China, whether it happens in Europe, or whether it happens in South Africa. And a good friend of mine, Idris Khamisa, tweeted during the week that events of this nature remind us of our own mortality and our own frailty. You know, we sometimes as humans, we become very arrogant. And we think, oh, look at us now, we've advanced so much, and we've got this mechanism and this thing to alert us and this thing to forecast and that to forewarn, and we've really progressed. There's no doubt we've progressed, but now and then Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala reminds us that, listen, you are never independent of Allah. Yes, you've managed to develop electricity to a very high level, but millions of people for a number of days are without electricity because of this one storm. Yes, you've developed trains and you've developed planes, but all the planes are grounded and all the trains are grounded. The subways are submerged in water and the runways are waterlogged. One storm. So Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala reminds us from time to time, you are still dependent on Allah. You are still dependent on Allah. And the power of Allah is far greater than your power. So don't think, oh mankind, that you are very independent now because you have progressed. This is the most sophisticated country in the world. This is the most well-equipped country in the world. Yet the country was literally brought to a standstill. Many parts, the financial capital of the country, Manhattan, New York, brought to a standstill. That's the power of nature. And Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala reminding us that you are never independent of Allah. You are never in control. No matter how much you have progressed and how much you've managed to minimize the impact and the effects of things, ultimately it is Allah who is in control. So focus on Allah and keep your attention on Allah. That's the third point that I wanted to make mention of. And then also purely from a media perspective, somebody made a very interesting remark. They say all of this is playing out in the United States, but the whole world is sharing in the drama of the United States because of the power of the United States media. Because they have such powerful media institutions and media houses, whatever is happening there is being relayed on the turn throughout the globe. And that, although I'm not going to branch off into a detailed discussion relating to it, will once again emphasize the power of the media. And then also there was a degree of disappointment worldwide that 50 plus people died in Haiti, many people lost their lives in the Caribbean. There wasn't as much focus on that loss of life, the damage caused to those countries, which especially Haiti, has much poorer infrastructure as compared to all the focus on the States, and whether this will now hold Obama in good stead, and because he's now neck and neck with Romney after losing the first of those 3 debates, and whether, because Romney can't do anything, he's not the president, he can only tell people, well, if you've got $1 or 2, contribute. But Obama was in the forefront, and he seemed to be really impressing people with how he was dealing with the situation. Apart from all of that, there ought to have been greater focus on what happened in Haiti as well, what happened in the Caribbean as well. But just remember these things, that those remarks that this is a punishment and they're getting what they are deserving, there is no basis in Islam for the reasons that I have explained. Rather, we should all take lesson, and we should actually be thankful to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala that here in South Africa, where there are many negatives, and we're always focusing on the negatives, but there are just many positives, if not more positives. And one of the great positives of living in South Africa is that you are not exposed to extreme weather. Let us use opportunities like this to derive lesson from what is happening, and at the same time also to thank Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala that we are not being tested and we do not face similar challenges. May Allah grant us the understanding. Welcome back to Friday Night Live. We now move on to our story for the week, where we try and share with you a story or an anecdote which has a lesson behind it, and with the hope and the intention that we will be able to take lesson from the lesson. Wahab bin Munabbah, rahimahullah, once mentioned an incident. He said, Malakul Maut, the angel of death. It's important that we pronounce this word correctly. It's not Malikul Maut, as many people pronounce it. Malik means king in the Arabic language. And the king of death, that's Allah. The person, the being that controls death, that's Allah. Malak means angel. A slight change in the pronunciation, but a big difference in the meaning. That's the intricacy and also the beauty of the Arabic language. So, Malakul Maut, the angel of death, he was once ascending through the various skies, moving upwards, with the soul of a tyrant who was second to none. A great oppressor who had just passed away, whose soul he had taken, whose life he had removed. And the other angels asked him a question. They said, you take souls on a daily basis. You are the means through which people experience death on a daily basis. Tell us, when was the one time when you were really touched at the time of having to take someone's soul? When it was the most difficult for you to take someone's soul? Tell us when that transpired, which episode or which incident was it? So, in other words, they were asking him, when was the time when you had to take someone's soul, when you felt the most compassionate? So Malakul Maut, the angel of death, he responded and he said, there was one occasion where Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala instructed me to take the soul of a mother who had just given birth, but she and her baby were all alone in a jungle. No other human being there, nobody else. And obviously the implication was fully understood that I'm taking the soul of the mother. This young baby is all alone. This young baby, newly born, all alone. But it was the instruction of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, and he took the soul of the mother. So the other angel said to Malakul Maut, do you know what? That same boy whose mother's soul that you took when the two of them were alone in the jungle, just after she had given birth to him, is the very same boy who grew up to become the tyrant second to none, whose soul you have just taken now. And Malakul Maut responded, and what did he say? Oh Allah, you are pure, most kind, and do as you please. Meaning, Allah, you understand, we don't understand. What is the lesson here? Allah had obviously looked after this boy directly. The angel of death had taken his mother's soul just after the mother had given birth. So this was a person who was a recipient of the very special favors of Allah. That he was alone in the jungle, no other human being. Yet Allah Ta'ala ensured that he grew up. And not only grew up, that he was granted power and that he was granted kingship. But the lesson behind this is, many a person grows up in the shadow of Allah's special mercy, only to then flagrantly disobey Allah Ta'ala without any remorse. How many a person lives in the kindness of others, only to ignore them when he no longer requires their assistance? I mean, just look at how we treat our parents. And one person is so beautifully penned, and he has said, truly man becomes ungrateful when wealth intoxicates his sense of dignity and reason. So this young boy who was just born when his mother passed away and they were alone in the jungle, Allah brought him up, Allah looked after him, and he became a tyrant second to none. And there are many who went through a lot of difficulty, but they became closer to Allah Ta'ala. For example, Samiri was brought up under the special guardianship of Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam. On another occasion, we will discuss that incident in detail as well. So sometimes we must be careful. It mustn't be that we come from very, very favorable backgrounds and we have received many favors of Allah Ta'ala upon us. But rather than those favors bringing us closer to Allah, those favors make us arrogant. Those favors make us feel there's no one like us, that we are independent, and that then distances us from Allah Ta'ala. May Allah grant us the understanding.
من ذا يفرج كربا بات يضنينا من ذا يفرج كربا بات يضنينا.
Welcome back to Friday Night Live. We now move on to our marriage tip for the week. In the last discussion a few weeks back, we spoke about the importance of mashwara in the home, mashwara between husband and wife, with regards to the affairs of the marriage and the home and the children, and also with regards the affairs of each spouse. The husband sometimes consulting his wife with regards to his pressures at work, etc. That's what marriage is all about. The wife confiding in him with regards to some of the pressures she's having in the home with her chores, with the domestic, etc. And at times even bringing the children into the mashwara. So everyone feels part of the process, and there's barakah in mashwara. Even Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who could have consulted directly with Allah Ta'ala, was still instructed to consult with Sahaba. Even on the occasion of Uhud, after Sahaba had given the wrong mashwara, that we should leave Medina and go and meet the army outside. Even after they had given the wrong mashwara, Allah Ta'ala tells Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, that you still need to consult them. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had no need to consult Sahaba, because as I said, he could have consulted Allah Ta'ala directly, but he was instructed to consult Sahaba so that the importance of mashwara could be understood by the ummah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam up to the day of Qiyamah. Now, the point I want to share this week, the tip I want to share this week is a very important one. Never argue and fight in front of your children. Never have your marital tiffs and your marital squabbles in front of your children. And I'll tell you why. You don't need anyone to tell you this in the first place. I mean, it's a logical thing. But I'll explain some of perhaps what we don't understand and what we don't realize, some of the consequences. When you have your marital tiffs and you have your marital squabbles, and that to an extent within certain reasonable limits is to be expected in a marriage, no marriage, no matter how in love the people are, or how long they are married, or how compatible they are, or how reasonable they are as human beings, or how good they are in terms of their character, is free of the occasional argument, the occasional confrontation between husband and wife, the occasional turbulence on this flight called marriage. When there's a turbulence, you just got to tighten your seatbelt for a while, isn't it? And that's the point I want to make. When there's turbulence, you need to be more careful so that the turbulence doesn't spiral out of control. Now, sometimes what happens, husband gets angry with wife gets angry with husband. On the dinner table, now you're fighting. In the car, you're arguing. In front of the children, you're hurling accusations and insults at one another. First consequence, it makes the child feel insecure, especially the younger ones. what do they feel? Hey, mommy and daddy are fighting, Abba and Amma are fighting. What if something goes wrong? They get their sense of security from their parents. That feeling of well-being, that feeling of being loved, that feeling of being cared for. Now when they see the two people whom they love the most and the two people whom they care for the most, when they see these two people fighting amongst themselves, they become very insecure. We may not understand it, they might not show it, they might not be able to articulate it, but it has an effect on their psyche. And that's why you see this in the behavior of children who come from broken homes, a home where there's a lot of hostility between the parents, a lot of antagonism between the parents. So number one, the children, especially the younger ones, become insecure. Number two, you're setting a very bad example, because those same children of yours one day are going to become husbands and wives in their own right. And if they have come from a background where they are so used to seeing their parents fighting in public, fighting in front of the children, they will resort to the same behavior. Number three, when you do this in front of your children are going to lose respect for you as parents. You as the husband, you are now highlighting the weaknesses of your wife, but your children are listening. You think those same children are then going to respect your wife? Husband saying, yeah, but you always like to lie. You always like to exaggerate. Now when that same mother scolds the child that you don't ever clean your room, Ma, you like to exaggerate. Where did they learn it from? They learned it from the father. The mother tells the father, you never at home. You're never spending time with children. You never, giving to your family. Sometime down the line when that father tells that son something, hey, you were not a good father to me. You never used to spend time at home. You were not good to us. Where did they eat? They heard it from the mother. So it's important that when you have your tiffs, when you have your arguments, when you have your squabbles, be mature enough and be patient enough to be able to postpone it to when you are in privacy, rather than having to have it at that instant moment. You see, it's because we can't control our emotions, we can't control our anger and temper. So we lash out and we blurt out in front of the children, in front of the kids, in the presence sometimes of the kids' friends. It becomes all the more embarrassing for them that your mother and father had it out in front of us. They don't know how to face their friends. So be very careful in this regard. Don't hurl insults, don't accuse, don't fight, don't squabble, don't complain in the presence of your children. Those are issues you need to resolve within the privacy of your bedroom. May Allah wa ta'ala grant us the understanding.
من ذا يفرج كربا بات يضنينا من ذا يفرج كربا بات يضنينا.
Welcome back to Friday Night Live. We now move on to our last segment, but a segment that I feel very passionately about because it leaves us with something practical which we can and which we should implement immediately, inshallah. For those who have been viewing this program regularly and repeatedly, ask yourself the question, how many of these sunnats have I brought into my life already? And every week if we bring this one sunnah, inshallah, we will be coming a step closer to the sunnah and to the ideal lifestyle of the ideal role model, Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. We are still on the topic of the sunnahs of eating, and this in itself is such a great example of the beauty of the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So many sunnahs just to this one action, eating. The last time we spoke about the impermissibility of blowing into food or breathing into a vessel. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam never blew into food. If it was hot, he waited for it to cool down a bit and then he ate it, because he never ate piping hot food. And that's why also when drinking, he encouraged that we drink in sips, 3 sips or more, so that you don't end up breathing into the vessel. Now the sunnah that I want to discuss for this week is the sunnah with regards to the evening meal. There is a narration in Tirmidhi where Jabir bin Abdullah radiyallahu anhu narrates that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, never omit the evening meal even if you have to eat a handful of dates, as omitting the evening meal speeds up old age. Never omit the evening meal even if it have to be just something little, just a handful of dates. But omitting the evening meal altogether speeds up old age. Now the ulama have explained this. They say this is not an excuse to have an extra meal, that no, I must have supper, because this has been mentioned in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is actually a prohibition from going to bed hungry, because when you go to bed hungry, it is detrimental to your health. Something, I mean, our condition is such, we're having supper when the lunch hasn't even digested properly. And then they say you must have breakfast like a king and lunch like a prince and supper like a pauper, so that you're not going to bed hungry, but at the same time you're not, your stomach is not overfull at the time of retiring to bed. So there's medical benefit in doing it that way. So this hadith is not emphasizing that you must have a hearty meal, supper, even if you're not hungry, even if you've had a late lunch, even if you've had a good lunch, even if you've had late afternoon tea. This hadith is actually telling us that do not go to bed hungry, because this is detrimental to your health. May Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala grant us the understanding. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of Friday Night Live. I've been really heartened by the fact that people have been giving us feedback via our email address. I understand in the last few weeks the email address was appearing somewhat incorrect on the screen. There was a slight error with the spelling. That should be corrected, inshallah, from this week onwards. The email, once again, SMR, S for Sulaiman, M for Muhammad, and R for Rawat, at itvnetworks.tv. That's SMR at itvnetworks.tv. Twitter, it's at Sulaiman Rawat. Sulaiman is spelled Sulaiman, Rawat, Ravat, Ravat. No spaces in between the name and surname. And then Facebook, it's facebook.com/Sulaiman Rawat. And the website, it's www.sulaimanrawat.com. So whichever way you prefer, whether it be email, whether it be Twitter, whether it be Facebook, please do give us feedback. What do you appreciate of the program? Where do you feel we need to improve? Suggestions that you may have, questions or comments that you may have. We look forward to all of that, because hopefully it will allow us to then build on the program, make it more beneficial, make it more inspirational, make it more educational, inshallah. It also gives us a lot of encouragement when we get feedback from people. It gives us an idea as to where people are viewing this program from, the kind of context in which people are understanding things, etc. So yes, nowadays it's become very easy. You can, before, to send an email was a long, drawn-out, elaborate process. You had to go and start up the computer, the big desktop, and then get in there. And the internet connection was slow, and you had to first via that, that whatever they call the thing, I can't remember, that used to make that very peculiar kind of sound. Then the internet dial-up, system, and then it starts off, and then send off an email. Nowadays, very simple, from your BlackBerry, from your iPhone, touch of the button, just like sending an SMS, you're sending a email. Twitter also is easily accessible. Facebook easily accessible. So let us utilize these bounties of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to communicate with one another for the betterment of efforts that are intended to benefit Muslims and to benefit the deen of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. As always, remember, we are Muslims. Wherever we are, whatever we are doing, however we may be doing it, we need to remember that we are Muslims first and foremost, and the laws of Allah apply in all circumstances. We never have a break from Islam. We never go on holiday from Islam. Seasons will come and go. Months will come and go. Situations and circumstances will change and will vary, but we always remain Muslims, and may Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala keep us steadfast on Islam. Remember me especially in your du'as, my family as well, the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala keep us all strong. May Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala strengthen our iman. May Allah grant us death with iman. May Allah resurrect us with iman. And may Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala grant us Jannatul Firdaus without reckoning, inshallah. Ameen, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Until we meet again, hopefully next week Friday, same place, same time. Fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
من ذا يفرج كربا بات يضنينا ويزرع الورد فينا والرياحينا وينشر الهدي إيمانا وموعظة فبالجهالة قد خابت مساعينا وينشر الهدي إيمانا وموعظة فبالجهالة قد خابت مساعينا من ذا يفرج